Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Martin Patchquin. I'm the Quebec correspondent with The Logic. First, I'd like to welcome everyone in our virtual audience, including our loyal Logic subscribers and new readers. Quick note to new readers. As a Logic subscriber, you get unfettered access to our award-winning daily newsletter, not to mention the most comprehensive business and tech reporting in the country. You also get access to exclusive monthly insider events, community surveys, job postings, as well as Slack channels where you can connect with your favorite Logic journalists. It is my great honor today to speak to talk about The Everything War, Amazon's quest to own the world and remake corporate power, which was published all of 2 days ago and is available where all fine books are sold. A link to the order will be provided in the chat. Please don't take it from me, take it from the Amazon's own website. The Everything War is the first untold, devastating expose of Amazon's endless strategic greed, from destroying Main Street to remaking corporate power in pursuit of total domination by any means necessary. Today, we're going to talk about, Amazon will literally sell anything. Today, we're going to talk about the book, How This Thing Called Amazon Came to Be and Where It's Headed. The Everything War was written by Dana Mattioli, our guest today. Dana is a 16-year veteran of Wall Street Journal, where she has reported dozens of investigations on CEOs, board directors, technology companies, and retailers. Dana was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Investigative Journalism for her work on Amazon, and is the recipient of a second Gerald Loeb Award for Breaking News, the Cebu Breaking News Award, the 2 New York Press Club Awards, and was a finalist for the Larry Berger Young Business Journalist Award. In addition to covering the best province in the country, I write a fair bit about big tech, and Amazon very much included. From a policy and public relations standpoint, anyway, I know and understand how this company works. And even then, I was gobsmacked at some of the examples that Dana unearthed in her book. It is my great honor to welcome Dana Mattioli here. Dana, thanks so much for doing this. Hello. You there?
Oh, I'm here. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you. How are you?
Okay, I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Yes, you're on a whirlwind press tour for this book, and I thank you very, very much. Seriously, thank you very much for doing this. I want to just briefly, before we get into it, this is an interactive conversation that we're going to have here, and of course, we would want the audience members to participate. To do so, you can do in the chat. You can put your comments in there, and we will comments or questions in there, and we'll relay them, and we can as the show goes on. So don't wait till the end. So Dana, you've covered Amazon for the Wall Street Journal since 2019, and which turned out to be a pretty auspicious time for the company. How did you get on this beat in the first place?
Yeah, so I was the Wall Street Journal's mergers and acquisitions reporter. On that beat, I was breaking news on which company was acquiring other companies, and something really fascinating happened during my tenure. In the beginning, the retail CEOs were worried about Amazon, understandably. But over the course of 6 years, everyone became worried about Amazon. It was the most invoked company in boardrooms around the country, and not just in the US, worldwide.
Yeah.
And there was this fear about them getting inside other industries, the consumer industry, and then the logistics industry, and then healthcare. And then these CEOs started doing deals to insulate themselves from Amazon if, God forbid, this company entered their space. And when it was time for me to leave the mergers and acquisitions beat, which I loved, I couldn't think of anything more interesting for a while, which is why I stayed so long. But then it was like, oh, duh, Amazon. It's this black box of a company that is inflicting fear everywhere in corporate America. I need to get inside this.
And so you've been on it since 2019. One of the things that I found super interesting within the book was the extent to which Amazon's early success, so we're going back to mid-late 90s to 2000s, came about as a result of loopholes in the U.S. tax code. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Amazon had a few really big strategic advantages over their competitor set. One of them was this tax loophole. There was a provision in the U.S. tax code that mail order catalogs didn't have to collect sales taxes in states where they didn't have a physical location. And Amazon was able to exploit that in a really clever way that someone described as Amazon's secret sauce early on. They didn't charge sales tax in so many states because they didn't have warehouses or, they didn't have a physical location other than Seattle, Washington for a while. And they weren't counting their warehouses as physical locations. They had a clever carve off for that entity. So basically, as the online shopper became accustomed to shopping online and price comparisons, you could look at the same Barbie doll for $9.99 on Amazon.com versus Walmart versus another retailer. But when you added it to your basket, it would be cheaper on Amazon because they weren't charging you the sales tax. And that allowed them to steal share from their rivals in a really fascinating way. And to the point where other CEOs tried to cry foul on this. They went to the Hill. They said, this is unfair. It wasn't until 2017 in some states that Amazon started collecting sales taxes.
How? Because I remember when Amazon came to Canada, I don't remember exactly the year. It's been a little while, but one of the main things was that the stipulation for them to come here was that they would charge sales tax like everybody else. How is it that they were able to get away with it for so long, up until 2017?
Yeah, they made the case that we're basically a mail order catalog, and that we have offices in Seattle, we have an office in California, but they were deliberate in not having corporate offices in other places. And when they had their warehouses, because the network expanded, they tried to say that that's not Amazon, that's a different entity. That's just like the logistics side. And they got away with that for a really long time. And then, then the states started calling BS on it and said, start paying us.
And there's some figures thrown around in your book. Is there an idea of like just the sheer amount of lost revenues? And if effectively the garbage didn't get picked up, the state highway that wasn't built, schools that weren't funded because of all of this?
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head what the figure was, but it's important to know that sales tax revenues are incredibly important to local jurisdictions. It funds the school system, it funds the road work, right? So these states were being deprived of like really important revenues for for those sorts of projects.
Use the word catalog. It's not a catalog of horrors. First, they managed to do this for so long. The other thing that you talk a lot about in the book is the practice on the part of Amazon to sort of dangle acquisition to up and coming companies and effectively copy their IP, and then so that they can make their own products. And it hadn't occurred to me, but the list of companies that are no longer or extremely diminished as a result of this practice is really long. And then, you list some of them in the book, like Doppler, Nucleus, Bonobos, and August Homes. What, having covered this beat for so long and having obviously written this book, can you give me a sense of what you think this has sort of done to the innovation and entrepreneurship community within the last 15 or so years?
Yeah, and just to take a step back to explain how this works is Amazon is this many tentacled octopus, and beyond retail, it's the market leader in so many different areas, right? So if you're a founder and you're looking for an acquisition to be bought out, or if you're looking for an investment, you sort of have to talk to them because they're one of the biggest players. And that's different than going to, a venture capital fund. If you're pitching this product or an investment to Amazon, they stand to learn a lot because they have so many competing businesses within the company. And what would happen is they'd open up the kimono, they'd share all their secrets with Amazon's corp dev team, their product roadmaps, their customer plans, their patents, everything else. And then they'd go down this path, they'd get ghosted, their emails would stop getting returned and the phone calls didn't get returned. And then Amazon would launch a competing product. And there's just some like gut-wrenching sort of anecdotes in the book showing exactly how this plays out. One VC told me, thank God you're covering this. Amazon is the devil. And it does. It has a chilling effect on the ability of these companies to fundraise, to get funding, because the VCs are now worried about backing companies that go head to head with Amazon. But everyone now goes head to head with Amazon. It's become one of the most dominant forces in business history. So, there's some examples in the book that, this is the only time in the book where grown men cried to me on the phone reporting it out because their livelihoods were taken away. They feel like Amazon stole their ideas. They called it corporate espionage. It's really just chilling stuff.
A couple of questions about that, but first, you set out in the book we call it in the newspaper, the church and state, that there's firewalls between certain sections, between business and editorial, for example. And those Amazon often says the main line is that there are firewalls between all this, but you show the extent to how to sort of like how those firewalls aren't high enough or are porous. And the thing that's funny, it's not, it's funny, haha, but it's crazy. It's just like the extent to which people were tempted to basically dip into that well, knowing that it was all there, and that the firewalls that were erected simply weren't high enough to prevent what is essentially, human nature.
Yeah, it's a mix of the incentives there, and also a mix of this big technological company not having the right firewalls in place. Someone on the record told me that it's kind of crazy that the infrastructure there was sort of, she said, the internal infrastructure of the company is basically popsicle sticks and duct tape. And because Amazon has this really cutthroat culture where the bottom 6% of employees are cut every year, employees are incented to do what they can to stay ahead, including looking at data that they're really not supposed to look at, but also it's easy to look at. And that's what we see play out time and time again in this book. They also have legal clauses that protect them. So in the M&A process and the venture capital process, they employ something called a residuals clause that says anything learned in these meetings with entrepreneurs or companies that we might look at, if we retain anything in the memory of an Amazon employee in those meetings, it could be used without penalty. And that to me was just fascinating.
Yeah, and you've, through your reporting and now through the book, and of course the book is just released, so let it play out. But this has all been cataloged, that they're doing this. What has it done to Amazon's practice to sort of dip into that well?
So there have been investigations into this. I had a big investigation at the Wall Street Journal in 2019. That was the basis for Jeff Bezos testifying to Congress for the first time in his history. And they proved a lot of what I was writing in the Wall Street Journal. And Amazon did this internal investigation into it, but wouldn't release the results. From what I understand, on the private label side, they've made this more buttoned up so that the employees couldn't access it anymore, but they haven't been fully transparent on this.
So that was the report, if I'm not mistaken, that's the report that they wrote and basically cleared themselves. But even though it cleared themselves, they didn't want to release it.
And I've asked them every which way, like if your internal report clears you of any blame, why not? Why not make that public? And I haven't really got an answer.
Which brings me to a question that it's something I wanted to ask you from starting to read this, because people that are listening in can basically, so Dana drops these things in her book. For example, owning the pipeline and then stealing from the pipeline to compete about people that are in the pipeline, that kind of thing. So there's the book is riddled with these kinds of things. And after every single one, you obviously you do the due diligence and go to an Amazon spokesperson and they say, no, everything's fine. So rough estimate, in the writing of this book, how many times were you gaslit by Amazon spokespeople, if you had to guess?
That's a great question. Listen, in the effort to be fair and give them the chance to respond, I let them. I told them everything I'd be saying in this book. And I said, give me competing intel or prove me wrong. I included their comments throughout pretty generously. But we had them dead to rights. I had hundreds of pages in internal documents showing this type of behavior that my sources gave me. I spoke to 600 people in and around the company, including some of Jeff Bezos's direct reports, 17 of them, and 5 current and former board members. So we had it.
Which I'm glad you mentioned Mr. Bezos there, but when you published a piece detailing how Amazon blocked advertising of brands competing with Amazon on its own site, Bezos himself responded with this statement. I'm going to read it. Newsflash, quote, newsflash, retailers promote their own products and often don't sell products of competitors. Walmart refuses to sell Kindle, Fire TV, and Echo. Shocker. In the Journal's next story, they will uncover gambling in Las Vegas. Now, not only is it bad faith, because as you point out, in fact, Walmart does sell those products from third party, but also it's just so petty. And why is the richest man, or one of the richest men, depending on the day, why is he so thin-skinned? Because this is one of the themes that comes through in the book a lot, is that he he is literally at the top of the pyramid of this company, but acts like he's still street level. Why do you think that is?
This was really fascinating to me because he wrote that comment, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And he is remarkably thin-skinned for a billionaire public figure. He throughout the book, you'll see examples where he engages in Twitter pissing matches, spends lots of his very valuable time crafting nasty tweets to Joe Biden and Senator Warren and all these other people. And what's interesting to me is that Amazon at the senior levels has this like victim mentality. They would complain that no other company in American history has been just chastised the way that they have. Not even, not even big tobacco, rather than like sort of addressing some of the criticisms head on. And, throughout the book, you see Jeff being pretty thin skinned, also Machiavellian and informing the culture in those sorts of ways.
I can add other names to that. And I know you're a journalist, you're not a psychologist, but, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, these are all guys that are very, very powerful in one way or another, and yet still feel the need that they have to go out and do this. Does that give you any insight into the male psyche? I don't know, but you know what I mean? Like it's just so bizarre to me that they feel the need that they have to give any sort of attention to anything on Twitter. I don't. So why does he?
I think sometimes insecurity could be like a double-edged sword. Sometimes it makes you thrive and to prove yourself, but also like the insecurity never leaves you. So you have to weigh in these sorts of ways, right? And you're defensive. And I think you see that time and time again with some of these big billionaires.
Yeah. The Amazon, the unofficial sort of tagline of it is it's a day one company. That is to say, it is always day one. Innovate or die. And I'm wondering if there's any sort of extension of that insecurity that you're talking about, that there's a perpetual worry that the company that is big as it might be, that Amazon could become, say, like another Sears or something like that. Like if we don't keep doing this, then if we stop, then we're gonna get overtaken.
Yeah, Jeff certainly has that paranoia. He says day two is detritus, it's death, we're dust, right? And he has pointed to the fact that a lot of these behemoths of days gone past wind up self-imploding, right? And he's tried to drive that home to his senior teams, not just the senior teams, the whole company, that if we don't keep innovating, if we don't keep stealing share, we could wind up like the Searses of the world. But I would say that there's side effects to having that day one culture, because it encourages you to act as this like scrappy startup. And the things that a scrappy startup would do don't really befit a $2 trillion company. You start to look like a bully and you have outsized power.
Yeah. At the same time, though, and you call it what it is. It's hubris, like coming out and saying this. One of the great dangers to companies, in my experience anyway, limited experience, is hubris, is doing this. Like if you start doing this, if you think you're bigger than everybody else, then you're in trouble. But Amazon seems to use the almost the reverse of that their hubris is a result of them thinking that they're the underdog. Like they have to keep, they're always punching up. Yeah. And the interesting thing in it is, double-edged sword. Yes, they come off as they do, but look what's happened. And you pointed out very well in the book. They've weathered the COVID. They weathered techlash. They've gotten through all of that by behaving this way. And I wonder how that speaks to Amazon's longevity, in your opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're now at the center of these antitrust lawsuits, the FTC, but
which
also
we'll get to in a second.
Yeah, but regulators all around the world have said, you're too big. There's a problem here. And instead of maybe being humble about it or acting, a little stung or whatever, their CEO these days is Andy Jassy. He has told his team, we're not big enough. We could be a $10 trillion company in the next decade. And I think that really speaks to their mindset, that they're not going to slow down. They want to grow.
Yeah. I want to go just to a audience question from Dwight. In the slew of antitrust motions that are making their way through the American legal system, how does Amazon's situation differ from other big players, in your opinion?
Yeah, so there's been a broader reckoning with big tech over the last few years, ever since the 2016 election. These companies were held up as these darlings by the Obama administration, by other regimes. They were bastions of innovation. They were employers, right? What we've seen in the last few years that there's been like significant questions about these companies and whether there are unintended side effects. So when you look at social media, is that leading to election misinformation, right? People are becoming skeptical. When you look at social media companies as well, it's, are they addicting teenagers or helping create, depression? So there's been a broader reckoning with big tech, I would say. Amazon's is a little bit different because the focus, at least for this most recent lawsuit, has been about its effects on consumer pricing.
Yeah, which we'll get to in a sec. Yeah. As you say in the book, there's boogeymen, corporative boogeymen throughout history. Like one of my first assignments as a general assignment reporter, like 2004 or 05, was to go out to a place called Guelph and cover the fact that this town was rejecting massively the fact that the Walmart was going to come in. It's sort of along the lines of what Dwight was asking, so that the arguments to not have the Walmart there was that it was going to kill the downtown. It was going to drive down worker wages and, ultimately create a ghost town of this very vibrant community. You could say the same thing about Walmart. And I guess, is it a question, it's a bit rhetorical, but is it a question that, Amazon was just simply better at doing what Walmart had been doing for a long time?
No, I don't think it is. I think that while Walmart was most certainly like the boogeyman of the 1990s, where people would picket and protest, what Amazon has achieved or wrought has been much more expansive. I mean, that's just one area. They are the biggest cloud computing company in the world. They are one of the biggest logistics companies in the world. Digital advertisers. They're in healthcare now. They've become almost a modern utility. They're unavoidable in a lot of respects. Like even when I speak to people that try not to shop there, they have a hard time avoiding it in other parts of their lives. Like if you take a ride share, they're on AWS. If you're watching Netflix, it's on AWS. In the middle of writing this book, Amazon acquired my doctor's office, right? So they bought One Medical. That's where I've gone for my medical needs for years, right? So they've their tentacles have just really spread everywhere in a way that you don't really see with like a Walmart.
Skipping ahead a little bit, but just because you mentioned tentacles in there, obviously part of what the FTC wants to do is to cut off some of those tentacles. Cut off some of those tentacles. What happens to that tentacle should it get cut off?
It's a great question. So the FTC lawsuit included some kind of arcane wording, but if you follow closely, they said that they would seek maybe structural remedies. That means a breakup, right?
Yep.
The big question is, what would that look like? If you look at the FTC lawsuit, they make the case that Amazon is cutting off innovation and leading to higher prices. And one of the areas they point out is that sellers feel like they have to use Amazon logistics to be on Amazon Prime. So maybe that would be, for instance, they'd make them split off their logistics arm in order to be more compliant, or it could be a different part of the tentacles. But I don't see them saying like you have to get rid of AWS. I think it would be more focused on their logistics arms.
A corollary to that is a question from Tom Nesmith from the audience. Amazon has committed many sins, but its cloud services seem to escape criticism, even much notice, although the cloud is a huge revenue driver for the company. Are you concerned that a powerful private company is gaining greater and greater control over the digital information and infrastructure of modern societies, particularly for government records and information?
Yeah, AWS is the biggest cloud computing company in the world. It is the biggest source of Amazon's profits. It's helped fund other areas of growth like their devices business. So it is just critically important to Amazon's success. And what you've seen is other competitors have cried foul about the government contracts. In particular, there's this big DOJ, Department of Justice mandate that Amazon initially got that was contested. So they've made a huge push for government agencies and succeeded in a lot of ways. You know, that AWS is what's backing the CIA in the US. And that gave it this sort of stamp of approval for other agencies to say, well, if it's good enough for the CIA, it's good enough for us. So that led to this massive number of government contractors going to AWS. I haven't dug in too much into like what the effects of that will be, but I would say that all the cloud providers are looking at that very closely.
Just along the lines of cloud, and as Tom says, it is sort of the guy in the background. You don't hear AWS. You don't. I mean, it's not customer facing so much as the Amazon website, for example. One of the things that I always wonder when, for example, like with the iPod, when Apple developed iPod and changed how people listen to music, my first thought was always like, well, why didn't Sony invent it? Because Sony invented the Walkman. I'm just wondering, why is it that existing computer companies, data storage companies didn't do what AWS did, wasn't able to do it? Like, why is that?
Well, AWS was like invented almost by accident. Amazon had this like really big, thriving e-commerce website where it needed lots of data, it needed a lot of storage, and it figured out that, hey, if we need to have all the backend systems just to run our website, other people need it too. And actually, we've gotten pretty good at this, so let's just commercialize it. So someone else could have come along and done it. But what's more fascinating to me is that they go and they make AWS, and for a while, it's just them. Like Google and Microsoft are really slow to say, oh, that makes sense. Let us make it. Let's roll up our own cloud services provider. They don't follow for years.
Why?
I actually don't know. It's something that when you speak to executives at Amazon, they're stumped by it too. They don't understand how they let Amazon get so far ahead of them. They think it's a blessing, but they don't understand why they weren't on top of this.
Yeah, because I mean, is it fair to say that some of those, like Google, for example, will use an AWS?
No, Google now has its own cloud.
Google has its own cloud.
Microsoft has its own cloud now, but it took them years to go ahead and do that.
Right,
Amazon
but as you
mentioned,
as you mentioned in the book, like Netflix, for example, is AWS.
I mean, Apple is spending more than $1 billion every year with AWS, and they compete with Amazon. So this is like that weird co-opetition that you see.
Yeah, and if Apple is hamstrung, just imagine the guy who's selling carpets, right?
Exactly. If they're reliant, then the guy who's selling carpets, who's a mom and pop, doesn't really have any recourse.
One of the things that you mentioned in the book again is the not the demise by any means, but the sort of restriction of Amazon private label stuff. What's the future there? Just a bit of context. Basically, Amazon had their private label, Amazon Basics, etc., for a long time, with a lot of products that they were basically using and occasionally copying from other people. They've sort of scaled that back. Can you just sort of explain why that is and what you think that the future of the private label stuff will be going forward?
Yeah, private brands is a big business for Amazon in terms of the amount of resources they dedicated to it. Bezos was really into this. He wanted it to be a success. It started early on, like 2009 timeframe with cables, that like monster type of cables that they started. That was like their first home run product, and they've expanded everywhere. What you've seen more recently is they've retrenched. This has become such an area of scrutiny for them that they've pared down the number of items. The storyline is no longer grow, get more items. It's been pare back, just focus on what works. Because it's been like this outsized headache for the amount of sales. It's had so much scrutiny, and I think the company's gotten wise to that. And they're saying, why are we committing on goals here? Let's just wind it down.
So is there a future where we don't have an Amazon Basics any longer?
I don't have any reporting saying that that's in the works. I will say though, when you think about Amazon's private brands, even though they don't include this in their description of private brands, they have a whole devices business that are Amazon branded products too, right? And that's also a pretty big business that's had a lot of resources, but I don't see them getting out of that either.
Okay. Yeah. I just thought of one of the things that Sonos was another one that went up against Amazon, but Sonos also goes up against is obviously in a lawsuit against Google as well. Given the fact that these spaces are controlled by so big companies, does the Sonos of the world have a chance with long term, and when they have to deal with companies like this? Essentially,
it's really interesting. You could see how constrained partners are when they're going up against these giants. So, for instance, Sonos says that both Google and Amazon have stolen their patents
That's right.
and have taken their IP. They sued Google initially because they didn't want to poke the bear in Amazon because it's such a big distribution partner. That was where the majority of their sales were coming from.
Yeah.
So it's like an uncomfortable situation to attack the 800-pound gorilla that you're reliant on for your bread and butter, right? So they did the Google lawsuit. But even if that weren't the case, even if they didn't rely on Amazon, it would have been extremely hard for them to go head to head with these two behemoths of a company with big legal departments because it's so expensive. And what I've seen in reporting out this book is even in situations where CEOs, founders say that Amazon rips me off, they copied my product, they did something illegal, very few of them sue because it will put them out of business. It will quite literally bankrupt them. So they have that protection as well.
There's a sense in the book, the machinations of democratic institutions, they doesn't go very fast. And there's a sense in the book that when you talk about the FTC lawsuit, that maybe the authorities have gone to Amazon too late. That as a late stage monopoly, as Lina Khan said, Amazon has already wreaked havoc on the retail space. If the FTC wins, what do you think the fallout will be for Amazon and the retail space in general?
And that's the big question, if the FTC wins. So let's say if the FTC wins, and let's say it does go into a breakup, right? Some of my sources were very quick to point out that you might have a Standard Oil problem. In 1911, the Supreme Court broke up Standard Oil, this giant trust. And what happened? It actually gained more power. The disparate pieces quadrupled in terms of their market values, in terms of their size, because they were already so big by the time it was broken up. And it spawned Exxon and Mobil and all these giant oil companies. It didn't put it, they didn't go away. And some of the people I've spoken to have said, Amazon is basically 12 different giant companies in one. Yes, I think being a conglomerate for them is a secret sauce. I think they leverage that and they synthesize their power through this octopus structure. But if you were forced to break up, these are still market leaders in their own right. Maybe they already won the war.
So in other words, it's too big already. Like the horse is
or
out
maybe
of the barn.
It's too little, too late.
Right. Just along the lines of the FTC lawsuit, it's interesting, as you note in the book, the Amazon executive was sort of thrown for a loop when Lina Khan, who is the FTC commissioner, I should say, came out and said that Amazon has always done this consumer welfare standard thing where you say, like, you can't go after us because we do good things for prices. We keep prices low. Where in fact, she came out and said, no, in fact, Amazon's presence in the market has actually increased consumer prices. So 2 questions on that. How much merit do you think this has? And also, if you could just explain a little bit how Amazon how the argument behind Amazon increasing prices in the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. Lina Khan made her name in 2017 on a paper saying that Amazon is a monopoly and it's using predatory prices. It's undercutting the market to gain market share, like low prices, right? And then the lawsuit ultimately last year says Amazon has raised prices. So there was like a little bit of a disconnect initially. But it's important to note that the Amazon that Lina was writing about in 2017 came from her research between 2014 and 2017 when Amazon was undercutting prices to get market share and build up its monopoly. When she sues them in 2023, Amazon is a different company. Look at how many retailers went out of business between 2017 and 2023. It's been the retail apocalypse, quite literally. Okay. There's fewer places for people to shop. Amazon's dominance has grown. And what we've seen happen over the last decade is Amazon has been able to gouge its sellers on its business. It's been able to raise its fees from about 19% a decade ago to 45% now on average. And when I spoke to these sellers, they complain about this ad nauseum. And they've told me that what they've had to do to grapple with this, to protect their margins, they've had to raise the prices of their goods. And that's what the FTC case is saying, that Amazon, although it still has the reputation of being this low cost retailer because it's traded off of that for a long time, it's not actually the case.
And what are the this is impossible for you to answer. I'm sorry, but I mean, I read this. I'm just like, what are the chances of them being able to sell this art? The FTC being able to make this argument, make this case that Amazon actually has a bad effect on consumer prices.
What's interesting is that this is kind of a traditional lawsuit for antitrust in the last 40 years. There have been a change in the way antitrust laws were enforced in the US. And it moved to the consumer welfare standard or low prices. So she brought forward a fairly traditional case on that front.
Yeah.
But the FTC, it's been an agency in flux. Lena came in. She was very critical of the agency prior to being announced as the chair. She thought that they were asleep at the switch, that things needed to change, that they weren't doing enough. She's come in and sort of railed against the consumer welfare standard, and then she brought forward a very consumer welfare standard case. When you see the FTC losing in these prior cases, it's been partly because they brought forward other types of lawsuits that have more fringe legal theories. This one is more traditional in a lot of ways, so that might work in their favor.
I see. The FTC aside, and government intervention aside, as I was reading the Everything War, I was kind of I was kept looking for signs of fallibility within Amazon. Cracks, something that a young, brash, go-getting entrepreneur of the type that we cover all the time could exploit and almost turn into gold. I didn't find any. I just saw this massive monolith. Did I miss anything? Is it indeed a juggernaut that is unpierceable or unstoppable?
It's one of the biggest companies in the world for a reason. I mean, that doesn't mean that they've done everything perfectly. I mean, they've had trouble in grocery, for instance. That's one space. They haven't done a great job at physical stores, but I think they succeed more often than they fail.
And another thing again that you mentioned in the book is from outside, we're here in Canada. One of the things that you notice a lot about U.S. politics is it's hyperpartisan, divide between blue and red, and it's gotten worse over the years. One of the things that has sort of united Republicans and Democrats has been antitrust, and this is cataloged fairly well in your book. Just as a last question, who's worse for Amazon in the coming election? Is it Biden or Trump?
It's honestly bad either way. Trump had so much vitriol against Jeff in particular because the book exposes he was jealous of his wealth, also hated the Washington Post, which Jeff owns, and thought Amazon was a monopoly. So there were a lot of nasty tweets and the likes. But funnily enough, behind the scenes, Amazon had good relationships with his cabinet. Kellyanne Conway and Jared and Ivanka were like befriending Jeff and Lauren behind Trump's back, right? Whereas the Biden administration, they seemed so well positioned. They had Jay Carney, a former Obama spokesperson, to be the head of government relations and PR for Amazon. He was very close to President Biden. He had worked for him as vice president. So there's this change in the administration. They're pretty stoked. They think they have good odds. And Carney had been pretty ineffective. There's scenes in the book where he's pleading with his former friends and colleagues to get an audience between Biden and Jeff. And they're pretty much told that he's too toxic to touch, that we can't. And, and to add insult to injury, Biden would very frequently invite Doug McMillon, the CEO of Walmart, to go meet. And it's just kind of funny. And beyond just the slights, the personal slights, Biden picked Lena Khan to be the head of the FTC regulating Amazon, which is, basically their biggest foe. He's very pro-union. Amazon's anti-union, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know who they'd want to win at this point, to be honest.
There's one more question that just came in. The tenor of this conversation is mostly critical, but what do we make of Amazon's innovative and critically acclaimed success, quote unquote, logistics? Credit where credit's due. They're pretty darn good at it. I keep thinking about how this could be applied to supply chain challenges in a broad range of other sectors. Any thought on that?
I mean, what they've achieved there is like truly remarkable. A decade ago, they were a small player on their own logistics. And 2 years ago, we saw them in the US unseat UPS, which is a 100-year-old logistics behemoth, as the top parcel carrier in the US. They're great at building out the supply chain. And what we're seeing now is actually they're bigger than UPS and FedEx. And that's just selling their own stuff. That's just how much volume of shopping is on Amazon.com. What they're about to do is sell other people's stuff for them. They're trying to get retailers to say, let us handle your inventory, and that will take more from UPS and FedEx and the Postal Service. So that part of the business is like truly, really fascinating.
The fact is, and it's a good question because it undergirds everything we're talking about. We are critical of Amazon here, but look, it's an incredibly persuasive product in that it's very, very hard to get off of, and it's become something that everybody uses all the time. What do you say to people that if we're going to stop using Amazon, find something better, get a better product?
I think it depends on what the customer's looking for. If you're looking for like fast and free shipping, I think a lot of other retailers have caught up on that. It might be 2-day shipping if you spend $35 or more, something along those lines. There's other places to buy these goods.
Yeah.
And I also think something that we should bring up is that, and the book gets into this, is that, yes, Amazon's got a ton of selection. It's easy, but a lot of what they sell, 60% of what they sell is from third-party sellers, and it's not vetted like it would be at a rival retailer. There are things on the website like carbon monoxide detectors that don't detect carbon monoxide, or fake tourniquets and items of that nature, that it's kind of like a buyer beware sort of situation.
And that's a newer phenomenon, isn't it? Like the fact that the crowding out of like a lot of this stuff, what didn't exist in early days of Amazon.
It's newer. I mean, they prioritize selection in a lot of ways, but that had consequences.
Yeah. Look, Dana, thank you very, very much for doing this. It's a fascinating book, and look, not to get into the weeds a bit on journalism, but reading Dana's book and you just get the sense that investigating people and investigating companies who don't want to be investigated is very hard. It's very expensive, and it's labor-intensive work, but it's critical work. It's stuff that the Wall Street Journal does. So the Logic, it's not anywhere near the size of the Wall Street Journal, but we strive to do that every single day. So thank you so much for the work you've done and for being here today.
Thank you. Can I make a plug on something really quick?
Please do.
Okay. For anyone who's watching, if you buy the book between now and the 27th and just email me your receipt, we'll send you a signed book plate for it. So nice. We're doing that. So we could just email it to dana.mattioli@gmail.com, and my publisher will send you a book plate for it.
If now it's time for a little housekeeping. If you're not already a subscriber to The Logic, you can find the link to the subscribe in the chat and visit Logic's website. Thanks very much to the Logic business team. The quick upcoming events. Next week, David Reevely is hosting a conversation of the future of Canada's satellite-to-cell connections. Please save the date. We are thrilled to announce that the Logic 2024 Summit will take place on Monday, October 28th in downtown Toronto. You can reach out to Ariel, the Logic's partnership manager, for more information. Keep your eyes on your inbox for all future event invites. Thank you. Thanks again. And thanks to Dana. Thanks to our audience. And please go read this book. It's a great read. You'll fly right through it. Have a great day.